Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. Nice to have you all on. It's morning for me, so I'm going to be drinking some tea and maybe some other beverages once I finish this mug as we talk this morning. Today we're going to be talking about something that I find really interesting, which is C and C++ development. What I'm going to be talking about is kind of geared towards mostly students or people who are new to these languages. Maybe you've learned another programming language before, but for some reason you're interested or you need to learn C or C++ for work or for school or just for a pet project of yours. So in my in the preparation for this, I kind of imagined that it'd be best if you kind of came into this knowing a little bit about another programming language that's probably not C or C++. The only reason for that is because I'm going to be talking a little bit about some programming concepts that aren't specific to C and C++, but have some quirks in those languages. So we're going to be talking about things like data types a little bit. We're going to be talking about object-oriented programming. We're going to be talking about compiling your code and what it means to do that. So if you're not familiar with those things already, that is okay, totally welcome. You'll still hopefully get a lot out of it, but you might not totally understand what we're talking about when we're talking about those things, and that should be fine. So today we're really going to be talking about what it takes to learn C or C++, why you might want to do that, what you'll get out of learning those languages, and what are the best ways to do that if you're on a Windows machine. This is kind of the information that I wish someone told me when I was a student and I was taking a class in C and C++, and I had my Windows laptop, and I said, what the heck, why doesn't this work like I expected? Like, why is this so hard to get set up? Um, and what are all these differences? So we're going to be talking a little bit about like what C and C++ is on Linux and how it's slightly different maybe than traditional C or C development on Windows. And talk about how you can kind of avoid all of those pitfalls as a new beginner. Okay, cool. So we have a slight agenda here. First, I'm just going to be talking a lot about what is C and C++, why would you use it, etc. And then we're going to introduce a tool called Windows Subsystem for Linux and talk about why you might want to use that. And then we'll actually be going in and playing with some C and C++ code. I'll show you what it takes to get set up with using C or C++ on Windows Subsystem for Linux. It's really simple, but I'll show you exactly what that looks like and what it will look like once you have it installed and kind of how you can go from just getting your very basics done to a slightly nicer setup. And if there's extra time, I thought we could actually play around with an old project of mine that I wrote, my first big project in C that I wrote when I was in school that deals with editing sound files. So we'll see if we get to it. Not really a big deal, just for fun. So before I get started, I'll talk about myself just a little bit. My name is Shana Matthews. I'm on Twitter as Shana Matthews. I don't tweet a ton, but every once in a while. I right now am a program manager at Microsoft. I work a lot on Azure developer experience, specifically centered around new users to Azure, so people who are brand new to the cloud. So I think a lot about how to make both their experience better with the products and working to make like different tools on Azure easier to use if you don't quite know what you're doing yet, and also to help make our documentation and help make tutorials for new users. Today we're not really going to be talking about Azure or the cloud too much at all. We're going back to a former role of mine, which was working as a C++ developer making UWP maps APIs. We don't need to spend too long on this. I'm not gonna talk too much about my old role, but if you're curious, I used to work on these APIs, but here the documentation for them. I used to work basically to make it possible to put maps in your Windows application if you were a developer. So I worked a lot on the points of interest. So if you're trying to put something onto a map and show where something is, show how to get to something, yeah, that's something that I helped out with. And all of that code was written in C++ on my Windows machine back in the day. So I had to learn a lot about C++ when I was first getting started, and I figure I'm here to kind of help pass on some of the wisdom to the new generation of developers. Cool. Okay, let's get right into it. I have a couple of visuals, but not too much. So first of all, what are C and C++? I think we probably all know that C and C++ are programming languages. They have really similar names. There's also another programming language with a similar name, which is C#. I'll talk a little bit about that too. But I just wanted to give a little tiny bit of history and comparison to kind of like show you why you might be interested in these languages. So C is really interesting because it's a very old programming language compared to a lot of languages we're using today. C was first came out in 1972, which is basically ancient in programming language years. It's much older. It's kind of crazy that it's still so popular today just because it was made so long ago. Tech turns over really fast, as you guys probably know. So it's amazing that this language that was written that long ago, like 60 years ago or 50 years ago, is still really popular. So part of the reason why it is so popular is because it is so simple. It is simple because it was written a long time ago and computing was just simpler back then, but it was also written to be simple. It was written to be kind of elegant, I think a lot of people would say in some ways. It's a simple language. It's not too complex, and that makes it pretty easy to learn too. But because it's so simple, it doesn't have all of the nice modern features you might expect in a programming language. And then C++ was written to kind of build on top of C, make C into a better language, and give it more of those features that developers really need and expect. One of those features is being object-oriented. So it's odd. I think maybe we don't talk too much about being object-oriented as a big deal in languages these days. But the reason for that is because it's just so widespread and popular. Actually, when C was written, the concept of a language being object-oriented, that is being written so that you create and instantiate objects, and then those objects have information properties within them, and then methods that you call in them. That concept didn't exist when C was written. It's kind of hard to imagine that now because all of our languages pretty much have an object-oriented nature, like Python, JavaScript, C#, Java, you name it, for the most part. So C++ added object-orientedness to the language, and it's really evolved a lot. C++, despite being invented a long time ago, 1985, it's been kept up. So basically the standards for C++ keep improving every year. New versions of it get released, and new awesome features get added, like lambda programming, all that good stuff. Another interesting thing of note is garbage collection. Garbage collection is another thing that maybe you don't really talk about too much. If you are, just checking the chat, one sec, I realized I lost it. Okay, something you maybe don't talk about too much if you're used to programming in any modern languages, again, C#, Java, JavaScript, Python. And I'm going to probably talk about the concept of garbage collection even. But if you're learning to program in C or C++, you're going to miss that garbage collection a lot. So the term garbage collection refers to the memory in your program. So when you make new variables, if you make a really big array, for example, you have a ton of stuff, just thousands of elements in your array, that takes up memory on your computer. And if you're you make a new array in Python, for example, and then you use it for a while, and then it's not used anymore in your code, the garbage collector of Python will take care of that for you. It basically means you don't have to think about that anymore. That memory, the right thing is going to happen. That memory will go away and be freed back up when you're done using it. C and C++, that's not true. You actually have to take care of all of that memory on your own. So if you make a really big array, for example, we're using that, you have to actually clean that up yourself. Otherwise, it's just going to keep hanging out in memory and keep hanging out there. If you've ever heard nightmare stories about pointers or about memory overflows, that kind of stuff, all of those things are things you actually do have to worry about with C++ and C. Um, so yeah, I have this little table to kind of compare these things. Like C and C++ are pretty simple languages, which is nice. C and C++, you might use them because they're very fast compared to other modern programming languages, but not so much with Python because technically you can make Python much faster by compiling it down to C code, but that's a topic for a different a different stream probably. And object-oriented, we talked about that, and then garbage collection. So I put a little asterisk by our C++ with garbage collection because one of the nice features that C++ added to kind of make C better is something called smart pointers. We probably won't talk about that today unless people are interested. But basically, it's like a helper to make it easier to keep track of your memory and free up your memory at the right times. Another like compare contrast thing. A lot of people will say or have a belief that oh, I'm sorry. Hi, I won't say your name. Fruit. I apologize. Thank you. Yes, the cute guy in the back. His name is Topic. He was a gift from one of my friends. He was a surprise. Sorry. Yeah, I'm not a pro streamer yet. Trying to keep an eye on the chat. But thank you. Hello. Good morning. It was a little slow at the beginning. Yeah, that's Topic. He was a gift from one of my friends. He's really large, really cute. I actually have quite a few frogs in here. But yeah, he says hi. Great. So cool. I was talking about C versus C++, and there's like a belief. Oh, don't feel bad. It's okay. It's okay. I will do a better job. Here, I'll move the chat closer to what I'm looking at. So I have to look over here to look at the chat. So C and C++ code. There's a belief, or kind of like a pretty much like a meme out there that like all C code is valid C++ code. And that is like only mostly true. I think it's true for like the vast majority of cases, but I just wanted to call it out because I think there's a huge misconception that it's like 100% true all the time. It's not 100% true all the time. It's mostly true, I think, for most use cases. If you're a beginner, you don't need to worry about it. If you're writing C code and want to like integrate it into your C++ code, that's okay. You just use your C++ compiler. But there are some like gotchas. We're not going to go through them because they're like kind of complicated, honestly. But this is a really, really good article. It's old, but like that's fine because it hasn't changed. A really good article that explains those gotchas if you're ever curious or running into it. It's gonna go, oh yeah, gotcha. It's gonna go through exactly the like weirdness that you need to keep track of if you're trying to use C and C++ code interchangeably. And remember, C++ code is not valid C code. It only goes in one direction. Some people say C is a subset of C++, and like I said, that's not quite exactly true, but it's kind of mostly true. Ah, yes, C sharp. One note on C sharp before I go on, I have to say something about it just because the languages are so similar. C++ built on C sharp, and C++ is kind of named C++, like an increment of C. C sharp was also named to be an increment of C, but it's not super related like the way C and C++ are. C sharp is it's a great language, don't get me wrong, but it's just not exactly the same in the way that it works. C sharp is a lot more similar to Java than it is to C by any means, and even to C++. So C sharp is like, it's kind of punny. This is probably dumb, but it's like a pun, like on C++ kind of, because it's like sharp, like in music, where you increment something, a note is like half a step up with a sharp. That's why C sharp was named that way. Just fun fact. Phosphorus M. What is your opinion about Rust? I don't know very much about Rust at all. It's something I'm really curious. Like, I would love to learn more about Rust. There's someone on my team who's actually talks about Rust a lot. Megan, she's amazing. I have much to learn from her. I think Go is the language I'm most interested in exploring next, but Rust is for sure on that list. Cool. All right. So why would you use C or C++? I've kind of hinted at some of this stuff, which is like, it's really fast. But if you are like doing any kind of low level programming, and by low level, what I mean is close to the hardware. So that could be doing stuff with IoT devices. It could be doing stuff with an operating system, basically something where you need to be close to the hardware. C or C++ is probably going to be your go-to tool there. C and C++ are also still pretty popular in gaming, and the reason behind that is because they are super fast. They're super speedy, performant languages. And if you're doing anything else that has to be super fast too, it's quite likely that you'll be doing it in C or C++, or at least you'll be doing it in something that compiles down to C or C++. C especially is also super popular in the open source community. The reason for that is kind of mostly historical. C is it's kind of like the OG open source language. So a lot of people just like it. They like it because it's simple, it's easy to collaborate on, so it's still pretty popular in open source. If you are being asked to learn C or C++, like I was in college, the reason for that is probably not because they think it's going to make you super, super employable, not because you will really, really likely get a job writing C or C++ compared to some of the other programming languages, but because it's really good at making you think about things you don't have to in other programming languages, which is good for learning. It's maybe not as nice for working in that language every day of your life. So if you have to learn C or C++, you're going to learn a lot more about things like data structures, because if you're learning C especially, all those nice data structures you're used to having, like for example strings, they don't exist. You actually, if you want a nice string, you have to make it yourself. In C, actually a string normally is an array of chars, of characters. C and C++ are also great for learning algorithms because it kind of strips away some of the niceness that can, make your job easier. So if you're writing your algorithms in C or C++, you really, really have to know what you're doing, and you have to kind of do it all by hand. Also, if you're taking an operating systems course, it's probably going to be in C and C++, just because most operating systems are written in those languages. I'm going to quickly look at the chat really quick. I think I saw some comments come in. Okay, what is your opinion on version of C, specifically managed C++? I think you're asking I think what you're asking is what's my opinion of all the versions of C++ released, what are the best ones? I'm going to talk a little bit about standard C++ versus digital C++ in a second, which might kind of start to answer your question. But I definitely think that you should be, if you're going to be learning C++ for the first time, you should go ahead and just dive right into the most recent standard ISO version of C++. It's going to have all the features. It's kind of a question of do you want to learn the really simple thing first, or do you just want to dive in and learn the most useful thing first? And I'm all for you learning the most useful thing first. So I'm a proponent of modern C++ for sure. Okay. Let's see. Unreal Game Engine uses C++. Unity uses C#. Yeah, that is correct. Many game engines behind the scene use C++ or C. If you're writing for a game engine, you can actually maybe use multiple languages, but what's running behind the scenes is usually going to be C or C++. I'm also not a game programmer, so if you know tons about that stuff, I love it. Okay. Awesome. More chats. Thank you. Looks great. C++ running on .NET CLR can be used to compile C++ libraries for simplified .NET interop, but managed C++ has all the drawbacks of C# and C++. Yeah, you're kind of getting into some of the complexities of interop with .NET stuff. .NET is actually kind of nice because it does allow for more interop than most programming languages. But anytime you're trying to do interop between languages, it's not great. That's like a one step beyond what we're mostly going to be talking about today. But maybe if we have more time at the end, we can get into it. Cool. All right. So why use C or C++ on Linux? One simple, like the simple, easiest answer is that C was kind of written with Linux in mind. The C language and Linux are sort of developed hand in hand. So obviously, the kind of mental models of working in the C programming language really similar and like work really well with Linux. But I think I also want to take a little bit of a step back and do a little digression to talk about standards, which is some of the stuff that was coming up in the chat. So for like a lot of programming languages, when you write Java, for example, or you write Python, you pretty much expect your code, whatever you're going to write, as long as you have the right libraries installed, you build it, it's going to do the exact same thing on any machine you write it on. That is like the ideal and like probably how it should be on everything. C++ is kind of such an old language. It's been around for a while. And it's kind of just more complicated than that. So right now, I would say C is kind of split into two main branches, and that would be the standard C++ library, which is what you're gonna, and compilers, which is what you're gonna use on Linux, and Visual C++, which is Microsoft's version of C++. By version, I mean their like compiler and their special libraries that they use. Some people also refer to C++ as the Visual Studio IDE. The development environment. Yes, that's just an FYI, really. I also included a couple Stack Overflows where people were answering this question. I think the main way I want to talk about it is the type of compiler. So there's the standard C++ compiler and there's the Visual C++ compiler, and they actually work slightly differently. They're mostly the same, and the Visual C++ compiler has changed over time and evolved to actually be closer to the standard C++ compiler. But if you are writing a really complex, large C++ project that uses all the features available to you in Visual C++, and you try to take that over and you try to build that with a standard, like an ISO C++ compiler, it's not gonna work, probably. So if you're first getting started, it's maybe easier, or if you're learning like C++ for a course, it's maybe easier to start with the standard C++ compiler and not worry about the complexities or the additional features that come with Visual C++. So I included a couple Stack Overflow questions that I thought were pretty good, talking about the differences between the two of these things. And today we're mostly going to be talking about standard C++ because we're going to be using C and C++ on Linux. I will also say a quick note that it's totally possible to develop cross-platform or to develop for Linux using C++ on your Windows machine. It is totally possible. It just takes a couple like settings and setup stuff that probably beginners don't want to deal with. So if you're really learning this language for the first time, I do recommend learning it on Linux, doing it on Linux. And if you have a Windows machine, we're going to be using Windows Subsystem for Linux, so you'll be good. Oh, the other note I had on there is conformance. So the word conformance basically means how close is how close is blah, in this case Visual C++, to perfectly implementing the ISO standard C++ like standards. And so if you're curious and want to learn more about what that means, those specific differences between standard C++ and Visual C++, I recommend checking out this doc. Let me pull it up. This doc right here. So these are just the Microsoft Visual Studio docs. And so if you go into them, go into the C and C++ docs, you'll be able to see this great table that's going to talk about all of the different core language features and when Visual C++ started implementing them, or if it doesn't exist yet, it will note that as well. Cool. All right, let me check the chat one more time. Oh my, oh, I missed a lot. Okay. Cool. Okay. So someone jumped straight from C to C#, C++ felt too complex. You know, I think that's totally valid. If you've like learned C and you feel like you understand the basics, like know how everything works, C# is a great language. It's really fun to write in. I think it's a little bit easier than C++ in some ways. So I'm supportive of that. Someone said C++ is not that much older than C#. C# is after all 20 years now. Yeah, that's true. That is accurate. I think it's kind of crazy how long a lot of these languages have stuck around. I think C is like the craziest one that people are still using it after all these years. Someone kind of just asked standard C++ compiler. I hope I explained that pretty okay. So I'll take just a second to talk about that again. So basically the language of C has these standards, like, here, I'll pull this up. This is a website for the organization that kind of manages what the C++ language is. And so they define standards that if you are making a compiler for C++, like what it needs to be able to do. And so the compilers that people mostly use on Linux, the compilers in the GNU compiler collection, which I can talk a little bit about more later, isocplus.org. Okay. They pretty much all follow exactly the ISO standards, but Visual C++ kind of evolved in a slightly different track. So it does not the exact same things, and it's definitely not that it's worse in any way. I actually think a lot of the things about using the whole Visual C++ ecosystem is really nice and nicer in some ways than using standard C++, but they are slightly different. So basically the compilers do slightly different things. So the words you write in C++ and then compile them through a standard C++ compiler like G++, that process is going to do something slightly different than like when you write C++ code on your Windows machine and compile it through your Visual C++ compiler. Okay, that was really oversimplified, but let me go back and look through this. Okay. Ooh, okay, this is a lot of chat, guys. I'm not used to this, sorry. Okay. In your opinion, the new languages Resco and Crystal, will they ever replace C++? That's so interesting. I'm gonna like defer and say I am probably not expert enough to like give a really good answer to that. I do think, but like I do think eventually we will get languages that replace these. And part of that is just because technology builds on itself and gets better. We can see stuff like with Python. Python is very easy to write in compared to C or C++. And some of the downfalls is that it's slower as a language, but we've invented crazy technology that does things like takes your Python code and converts it into C or C++ behind the scenes and makes it really, really, really fast. So I do think that eventually things will go away. Part of the reason why these languages are still so popular is because they're used in a lot of open source technologies. And I think they'll stick around in that sense, but I do think they'll kind of probably get less popular as time goes on. And by that I mean like 20 years, 30 more years, the long time frames. Okay, all right. Cool. People talking about garbage collectors. Yes, interesting. Learn C++ on Windows. Nice. Yeah, I'll talk more about how I learned it later. Cool. All right, I'm gonna skip some of these because people are answering your awesome questions and chatting with you. All right. Cool. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit now about learning or getting started with C and C++ on your Windows machine. So as I've said, I think there's really good reasons to do your C++ development on Linux. The easiest way to do that, if you have a Windows machine, in my opinion, is to use Windows Subsystem for Linux. So Windows Subsystem for Linux is basically, at a high level, a simple way to run real Linux on your Windows machine. So if you're actually using the latest version of WSL, you are going to be literally running an actual Linux VM inside of your Windows machine, and it's super easy to set up. If you go to this site, aka.ms/WSL, which is where I just popped to right over here, you can go through the instructions. It's really simple to install, just like a couple PowerShell commands, and then you like literally install a Linux distribution from the store, which is great. And so what it will look like when you first install it is, let me pull it up. You're gonna like have, here, I'll maybe show you on this screen. I'll show you. I have Ubuntu installed. So you'll actually have a new app on your computer that's called Ubuntu, and you can open it and it will look like this terminal. It won't look exactly like this because I've done something silly with the fonts, but it'll basically give you a new type of terminal. And this terminal is just like routing directly into your new Ubuntu install, which is awesome. So you can see here, I'm using like normal commands. And so we are in my Linux side of the computer. So yeah, okay. So that's what it's gonna look like. Once you've done that, you're like 90% of the way there towards being able to actually write and install C and C++ code. Some Linux distributions come with a C++ or C compiler already installed, but if yours doesn't, it's really easy to install one. I would recommend, if you're on a distro that has apt, like just install your build essential and install ddb. So this is like the command that I would use. But it's very easy to look up how to install G++ on whatever distro you've chosen. So for my purposes, I'm gonna pull up a different terminal that I have configured the way that I like it. So I actually use Windows Terminal, and I promise it's not just because I work at Microsoft, it's because it's really awesome. And it lets you like pick whatever terminal you want. So we just searched for Ubuntu and opened up that shell. But I can open up whatever shell I want right here in my terminal. So I have Ubuntu open. So we can see, again, my files. This time we are started on the Windows side of my computer. So there's kind of like a lot going on here. I wonder if I can. There, that's a little better. So you can see like all the familiar stuff that you might have on your Windows computer, like my documents, etc. I'm going to move over to our Linux side of things. And so now you can see I've got my Linux files over here on this side. All right, I'm going to look at the chat one more time. Y'all are very talkative. I love it. Okay. Oh gosh, I have to scroll up. Okay. Oh, people are still talking. Okay. Someone says, L. Schultze says, I think one can even import C++ modules into Python to enhance the runtime. Yeah, I've never done that. I'm pretty sure that you can, there's a special way that you can do that, but yes, it's very cool. Geek Trainer, hooray for Ubuntu and WSL. Heck yeah, it's the way to go. People talking about lots of love for WSL. Fuel, Snable, WSL works really well for me at work. We are on AWS and use a lot of Bash and lots of Linux tools. I hardly touch my MacBook Pro anymore. That's hysterical. I love that. That's really great. Nature Hermit. Are there any gotchas or best practices to follow for WSL, please? Yeah, I would say I don't think there are any really big gotchas. I think there's a lot of tips and tricks that are really cool for using WSL. I think some of the biggest ones are about how to kind of interact between your Windows files and your Linux files. I think that's the biggest thing that might feel uncomfortable at first, but WSL actually makes it really nice. So I don't know if I was really clear before, but I was able to switch between my Windows file system within Linux, so dealing with my Windows files in Linux, and my Linux file system just by switching over. So you can do that, I think with mount C. And so just with that command, so change directories to mounted C drive, I switched right back over to, you can see them right here, my Windows files. Beautiful. And then I can switch back over to Linux by just telling it to change directories to tilde. And this tilde is like a shortcut for referring to your Linux home. Yeah, I won't go too much more into that. But yeah, one super cool thing is that if you like dealing with your files in File Explorer, which, you know, some like Linux diehards don't, but I personally do, you can actually open up your files in File Explorer right here. You can launch different programs like Visual Studio Code. I already have it open, but here, let me open a new one. But bam, just by typing that. And so now this is launched in the context of my Ubuntu. So it's got all of my Ubuntu files on it. Yeah, so there's some interesting stuff with like new lines and like line endings for files. If you already know a lot about Linux versus Windows, you might be familiar with that stuff already. I probably won't get into it too much here, but Windows Subsystem for Linux helps a ton with that stuff. It makes it like really easy and like deals with a lot of the complexity of all of that new line goodness for you. All right, a couple more questions. WSL is awesome. The only problem is networking and memory management. Yeah, WSL isn't perfect yet, but it's getting better every day. Ubuntu on WSL is the Zero to Hero to Dev says Ubuntu on WSL is the last line of defense for those who are insisting Mac is a better development environment. Well, TBH, Mac is aesthetically more pleasing, and for design tasks, it is still to me a better fit, but Windows has gone a great way to catch up. Yeah, I totally agree. I actually talk to some of the awesome people who work on products like WSL and like this terminal product all the time, and they're super excited about making like PCs cool again. Basically, they want to make them really good for developers, and they've been working actually for quite a long time on it, and now finally the products are starting to get there. The hard work is starting to pay off. It makes me so excited. I actually used to own a Mac, and I like never use it anymore. Okay, love it. Geek Trainer says WSL removed my desire to buy a Mac. I love it. Phosphorus M says, how does WSL differ from a Docker image? That's a good question. I am not an expert on how WSL works behind the scenes, nor am I an expert on Docker. So I don't know that I can answer that super well, but WSL 1 and WSL 2 are pretty different. I think, so WSL 1 works by taking basically some of the binaries from Linux and bringing them over. WSL 2 works by basically doing full virtualization of your of like an Ubuntu VM and packaging that up nicely inside of your little terminal. Docker like is different because it's something that you have to run on your own. You have to maintain it yourself. If you're you have to maintain and set up your image yourself. If you're really comfortable and good with Docker already, I suspect you'll be able to set up something similar to like WSL that would work really well for you. But you don't need to understand anything about Docker to use WSL. Okay. Okay, someone asked about updates coming to WSL. I'm not on the team and I can't speak for them to announce any updates coming that are like any specific updates, but I can tell you they are working really hard on WSL 2, and good stuff is coming out all the time. Cool. Zero to Hero Dev, thank you for answering some of these questions and explaining more about WSL. Yeah, it shares the same networks, your localhost, your machine's localhost. Yes, exactly. So yeah, basically you could probably do most all of the same stuff by using Docker, but you don't have to. And like someone else said, Docker can run on top of WSL too. Totally true. You can run Docker on your Windows machine, or as some people prefer to, you can actually run Docker within WSL. So you're running it on the Linux side of your machine. Cool. All right. Awesome. I'm going to snap back to talking about the formerly scheduled agenda here, but I appreciate all your participation in chat. All right, cool. So if you are starting to learn C or C++, the first thing you're going to want to do is probably write a Hello World program. And I really love this website called Rosetta Code. If you've heard of it, drop it in the chat, because I feel like not that many people actually know about this website, and it is so interesting if you're just like a programming languages nerd like me. So Rosetta Code, it's a pun on Rosetta Stone, which is like this old big stone that was used to translate between languages. I don't actually know that much about the history, but Rosetta Code shows you a whole bunch of different programs, like a bunch of classic stuff, like FizzBuzz, if you've heard of that. They call them tasks, programming tasks. And so here's a list of all of the different tasks that they have like programs for written out. Hello World is obviously a classic one. So basically for any of these different tasks, you can go to the page and find it written in a ton of different programming languages. So if you know one programming language and you want to see, compare it to another, this is such an amazing tool for that. So if I knew a different programming language, for example, and I wanted to write Hello World in C for the first time, I could go in here, and we even have the Hello World Newbie task. So it's set up just for beginners. Go in here and go to my C, and it'll literally tell me everything I need to do to get started with learning your, writing your Hello World. So it tells you as much as like, here's how you install a compiler on Linux, on Debian-based systems, and it'll give you something to do to get a Hello World program done. This version that they have is using some advanced like Linux features, some bash stuff, but let's just copy paste it in, see how it works. So I'm gonna pull up my WSL again. We're gonna go to where I have some of this code for this project. Perfect. Let's just try it. So if you're like a super beginner to Linux and to Bash, one thing to know is that you don't want to copy paste the $sign. All right, so what did I do? So what we did is cat. So we actually added all of this code to a new file called helloworld.c. And if I were trying to get started with C programming for the first time, and I didn't like have a bunch of tools set up yet, you can always use different text editors that are already installed. I know Vim gets a lot of hate, but we're going to use it quickly just to show you. So we can open up the file that we just created. And so we can see that everything we pasted in there is there. We're good to go. I'm not a Vim expert, but I'll just say quickly, if you need to know one command in Vim, it's this one. It's to press escape:Q. That'll get you out of there no matter what. Q exclamation point too, if you're running into any issues. So we have a file, which we think is probably working C code. let's compile it. So it's telling us we can compile it using GCC, which is our C compiler. I'm actually going to just go like this, GCC hello world.c, which is the easiest way to get going. So let's see what happened there. So when I type GCC hello world.c, which is how the simplest, super basic way to compile a C file, I didn't even put anything else in there. What it did was compile my code and create a binary called a.out. I just wanted to point that out because when you're first getting started, I was very confused about what happened here. What is a.out? Why is it named that? How do I use it? A.out is just the default name that this compiler, this group of compilers gives to code that you've written, so the binaries that you produce by compiling. And you can run it by typing / and then a.out. Ta-da! So there we go. We have now officially written a little bit of C code. Let's go in and edit it just a little bit. So I'll show you. So if you're writing, like this is how some C programmers like literally write all their code. They do it in Vim. They do everything by hand. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But in my opinion, and as someone who like has worked in proper IDEs with a lot of really nice features for a long time, it doesn't really work for me. It's a little painful. Hello, stream. Okay. So write quit for Vim. And let's try compiling it again. This time we're going to use .o or -o, the O flag, the out flag, which is going to tell it what we want to name our compiled binary at the end. Hello, hello. We'll name it that. I don't know. Cool. So we can run it again. Well, actually, first I'll show you that it's there. Hello, hello. We've got it. Love it. Okay. So we just officially wrote some C code, easy peasy. I'll check out the chat really quick, and then we'll talk about how to make it a little bit nicer to write your C code on Linux on your Windows machine. Okay. Love it. Yes, this is recorded. Thank you, Geek Trainer. Nature Hermit says, another question. Writing hello world is so different from the real world. Would you have any example from intermediate? I learned more C++ writing a game than following silly hello worlds. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I think hello world is a very necessary step to get started with any new programming language for the first time. Actually, the first step of getting your feet under you is so important. Like, how do I actually compile this stuff? How do I actually run this stuff that I just compiled on my new system? But it's that step, as you mentioned, from, okay, I have stuff compiling, I can copy paste stuff. How do I get to the next step? That step is hard. And in my opinion, there's no really good, like one route to go from like hello world to being a fully independent programmer in this new language or technology. This is really like oversaid by this point, but I think the best way to do it is to find the smallest project that you think is interesting enough to actually keep going with it. So really, I'm serious, like as simple as possible. I think the first thing that I did in C, I believe, was write a little tic-tac-toe app. So literally the simplest thing possible, because any like simple project you think of is probably going to be harder than you expected in a new programming language. So the simplest thing you think you can actually, you think is interesting enough that you'll actually make, and then make that. You can go to whatever tutorials you need, see sample code if you need to, but I want you to actually write it by yourself in whatever development environment you have set up. Don't copy paste any code. Try not to look at code too much, except for just reference once in a while when you're making it. And I think that's the next kind of step after hello world to take. I think like really simple stuff like, like tic-tac-toe, Minesweeper, like I think someone in the chat said a text-based game. Yeah, absolutely. All that stuff, those kind of projects are perfect. And another thing this is a little off topic. Don't worry about making something that's already made. I used to stress out about that like so much when I was first learning to program. I was like, oh, that's such a boring thing to do because someone's already done that, or a billion people have already done that. That is okay. You gotta let that go. You're not gonna step into something and be this like innovator and make something that no one's ever thought of or done before when you're just learning. Please make something that someone has made before. That is like the best way to learn and grow. Okay, off my soapbox. Cool. Okay. People talking about different text editors. Yeah, Nano is the simplest. Totally agree. Nano is great. I don't know why I use Vim. Yeah. Talking about other editors. Cool, cool, cool. Is there an audio delay? Yes, there's an audio delay. Let me know if you're having issues. Fruit said, wait, she didn't say hello world. The first one did say hello world. The first one did. I changed it to hello stream to say hi to everyone. Diavis says, is there other platforms to learn or practice on, or real projects, or to practice it, or real projects to work on? Yeah, I would say, I think I kind of answered this, but I would say you're gonna want to do a real project, like I was saying, like a project that you came up with, you're excited about, you actually want to use, but not something too big, not something too innovative. Okay. People still talking about the C++ standard? Yes, exactly. Sponge Party. Thank you. That's a great explanation. The C++ standard is just a spec. And we looked briefly at the like organization that owns that standard. Each compiler organization, including Microsoft GNU, implements that spec. Exactly, exactly. That's a great explanation, Sponge Party. Thank you. Cool. All right. Ooh, Diavis asks, what's the most exciting project that you worked on? I mean, I think the most exciting stuff I've done is stuff that I've done at work. I once worked on this like mixed reality project, where I was helping to create like this, we call it a volumetric map, which basically means like a 3D map that you can look at on a HoloLens or any other type of VR headset. And it was really hard. It was really hard. And I worked on it with a bunch of other people. It was really cool. We eventually got it pretty much working. And it got to be used as this demo project at a conference. It's very cool. All right, I want to show you a couple more things before I wrap up. So we're gonna zoop back to the previously scheduled agenda here. Okay, so I showed you just doing Hello World in Vim and with the normal compiler. That is like all good if that's what you want to do in WSL. Like if that's where you're comfortable and want to do your programming, more power to you. I personally prefer to use an IDE and preferably like the most full-featured IDE possible. So when I was doing professional programming in C++, I actually used Visual C++ and the whole Visual Studio ecosystem. I'm showing you Visual Studio Code today, which is like, we're showing because it works really well with WSL and it works really well with Linux. So what I just did was I typed in code to like launch my Visual Studio Code, assuming you have it installed. The things you're gonna wanna make sure that you have if you wanna do C++ programming on WSL are a couple extensions. So the important extensions are this one, Remote WSL. So this is what makes it nice and easy for your Visual Studio Code install to communicate with your WSL install. It sounds complicated, but really once you install it, everything just works smoothly. So you need to make sure that's installed. And the other thing that's optional, but highly recommended, are the Microsoft C and C++ tools for Visual Studio Code. It's gonna give you really nice stuff like debugging, an easier way to compile, that you don't have to do stuff on the command line, IntelliSense and autocomplete, and being able to dig into definitions of stuff. So yeah, highly recommend that. I'll just show you some of what that looks like since we're a little short on time rather than, um, you know, maybe how to do some of the debugging that I was thinking about. But okay, so I have this awesome project that is editing sound files. Um, and I will just show you kind of the cool stuff you're able to do with the C and C++ tools in Visual Studio Code. It really makes it almost as full-featured as using real Visual Studio. So I can do things like, I'll show you again. I just pressed F12. And so I jumped into the definition of this C function. So I'll show you, if you're not comfortable with all of the keyboard shortcuts that kind of exist in this ecosystem, you can always right click on the thing you want and see the cool stuff you can do. So I just pressed F12 and that let us go to the definition. So I didn't write this code, string.h. I'm pointing at my screen, string.h that you can see here. This is part of the standard C library. But if I want to use one of these methods but don't quite know how to use it, I can actually go to the definition of that, and it'll give me, this. It's kind enough to give me a quick comment telling me what this method does. It'll give me the method signature so I can get a better idea of how to use it. Yeah. So that's really sweet. I wonder what the best way to show you. Let us go ahead and throw a little, oh, the other thing, yes, there we go. The other thing I wanted to show you. So if you're interested in doing this yourself, the C and C++ extension actually, like, the people, the awesome doc writers have written this great doc for using GCC, which is the standard C compiler like collection on Windows Subsystem for Linux. So that is this doc. It is a great doc. It'll walk you through everything you need to do, not only to set up WSL, but to set up your remote extension, set up your C and C++ extension, and it'll talk to you about some of the things that I was hoping to get to today about using IntelliSense, setting up a build process with like different JSON files, and setting up debugging as well. So highly recommend that. If someone could drop that in the chat, or that would be much appreciated. So I'll just show you a little C++ right before we, you know what, actually, I'm gonna check the chat one more time because we are a little short on time. And if I still have a moment, I'll show you something. Okay. All right. Fruit says, reposting, can someone take a snapshot of WSL to import to Azure? Yeah, I think you should be able to do that. If you're using WSL2, I think you can do that. I've never done it myself. But if you use like a standard Linux snapshotting tool, I believe you should be able to get a snapshot of your whole like WSL2 Linux VM. And then import it into Azure. Never tried it. If you do, write a blog post about it. That's a cool idea. Someone says, Fool Snable says, if you like graphics and like programming in a C-like language with sub-seconds from code change to visible, I recommend GL, SL, and fragment shader programming. Yeah, I worked with a bunch of people who did like special graphics stuff when I was working on that volumetric map. They had so much fun. They loved their jobs. I was very jealous of some of the cool stuff that they got to work on. Nature Hermit says, I also think it's best to compile C++ as well as learning best practices is to compile interfaces and implement one step at a time. I totally agree. I really think going back to the absolute basics is like the best way to really learn a programming language from the ground up. And I'm like kind of a nerd about programming languages, but I think it's so awesome to go back to like the very basics of understanding C and C++ and getting really low level with them and like write your own constructs, like write your own, I've lost the word, like, man, like write your own, like, data structures, thank you. Write your own data structures. So implement your own linked lists, implement your own heaps, all of that stuff. Very cool, very nerdy, but it's good. People talking about OpenGL. I don't know that much about it, so I'm gonna skip it. People talking about Vulkan. Yeah, sorry, I just don't know that much about graphics programming, but it's good stuff. Fruit says, before you go, happy birthday to Windows 95. Happy birthday to Windows 95. That's awesome. And someone likes my frog. Thank you. Yes, his name is Topic. I briefly covered that at the beginning. He's a friend. Cool. The Chillennial says, I only code in binary on a rock with a chisel. Love it. Love it. That's beautiful. Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, Fruit says debugging must be tough. Yeah, it must be, but worth it, right? You're really understanding what you're doing. Okay, cool. I'm sorry we really didn't get to look at my C project at all, which is what I wanted to do a little bit more. Basically, the C project, like, you can edit sound files. I'll just show you like one really quick thing because I don't have a hard stop, I have been told. Let's see. Project 1. So this is like, yeah, like a project I made when I was in college to edit certain kind of sound files. I'll just show you it. Like, basically it only works with certain types of sound files, but you can kind of like cut and paste sound files together. And there's a super basic functionality for visualizing sound files. Actually, let me do it in this guy. Project 1. Okay. So I'm invoking my binary sound show, and I'm gonna pass in a file to it on standard in, which is what that little less than sign meant. Let's do zep clean. So this looks a little crazy, but this is basically looking at the different channels in the sound file, and when there's sound coming on it, at what level, it's displaying little lines to show how much sound there was at each of the channels at a different point. It's really fun. I wish I could have showed you a little bit more, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about how you would want to start learning C or C++ on your Windows machine with Windows Subsystem for Linux. I hope I convinced you that it's the right way to go. Yeah, I'll stop this for you. Yeah, cool. Let me just check the chat one more time and then I'll sign off. What am I drinking? Tea. This is an Earl Grey with a little bit of milk. Thank you, Geek Trainer. Thanks for moderating. Thanks for coming. Fruit says, nice automatic Git detection folder. Yes, yeah, I'm using Zish and Oh My Zish. I think that's how you say them. With Windows Terminal on Ubuntu, mostly because they have nice autocomplete stuff and they look pretty, to be totally honest with you. Diava says, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Thanks, everyone. I really enjoyed talking to you all today. Thanks for all the participation in chat. Okay, signing off. Bye, friends.